Hello friends, today I'm making a monogram S using the statement alphabet and the Garden Trimmings dies from Poshta. These dies that you see me pulling off my card here, they cut the holes to make these beautiful flower details on the statement alphabet or any other die that you might want a floral detail on. There are a bunch of different shapes that fit in the letters, and you get that great inspiration guide to show you how to stitch these. So I've already cut all my pieces here. Most of my colors of my flowers are from the Dreamsicle color story. I used vintage glass for my large S, and you can see that I took that Garden Trimmings die and cut the holes as my guide on where to put my stitches onto that S. So I'm starting out with this very pale green color. This is from the Dreamsicle floss pack that goes with that color story, although the green that I used for my leaves is a bit darker. I think it might be the Grove felt, I'm unsure really, but I wanted to show you, you get this guide to show you where you need to do the little lazy daisy stitches because those are obviously not a part that's cut from felt. You want to stitch those with the floss. And I'm going to start here in the center and work my way out. Now I am going to go ahead and stitch those little leaves on. So you're going to see me pull this out here. I decided I wanted to stitch the leaf so that I kind of filled that hole and I didn't get confused thinking that might be a hole where a lazy daisy stitch goes. So for me, I felt like this helped me figure out the placement of my stitches a little better. And to tack this leaf on, it has those three little holes at the top and then the hole at the bottom, and then you get this really nice kind of detail on top of the leaf when you stitch it like that, which is also why I'm using a different color green floss than the felt that my leaves are cut from, so that you will see that detail of the stitches a little better. And you can see I'm just tying this off on the back after I did those 3 stitches, just tying a knot, and that will help secure that. Now I'm going to work my way up this sort of center stem where my lazy daisies go. And you do have to be careful. I did catch my S a lot that it's just out there waiting to be caught with the floss. Let's just say that. And what I like to do with a stem like this is do my running stitch, which is kind of every other stitch up the stem, and that kind of helps me define where that stem is. And then as I work my way down, I'm going to make my lazy daisy stitches. So I went up a hole, made a loop, went back in the same hole, and I'm holding that loop. Then I'm coming up where my stitch holds the top of that lazy daisy, and I'm tacking it in place. So I'm doing the same here because there's one here at the end. So I stitched my running stitch all the way up from the base where the flowers are going to go to the end where these stitches are. And you can see there I was trying to pull it out a little bit. I pulled it too tight, so I pulled my loop down into the hole. You do have to be kind of careful with these and make sure you don't pull it too tight. And then I have 3 lazy daisy stitches at the top. So now that I have those stitches in there, I'm going to work my way back down the stem, adding in the other lazy daisy stitches and adding in the parts of the stem that I skipped when I did my running stitch up the top. So there's only 4 there. It's not a lot of stitching. And then what I did was I tacked it underneath the thread that was there, and then I'm just traveling across the back, and I am going to put my other leaf on just like I did at the beginning, lining up those little holes, and I'm going from that base hole at the base of the leaf up to those 3 holes at the top. So we get that fun stitching detail. Now on this side, I did go ahead and go up that stem and then come all the way back down before I did my lazy daisy stitches, but the technique for making those stitches is the same as I did on the other side. Now to add my flowers. So there are 2 flowers with petals, and I have a center. And you can see on the S, there is that little circle of holes, and that is where this flower is going to line up. And I need to line up the holes on my flowers. And I did go off screen because I like to hold these up to the light and make sure I have the holes lined up. I'm putting my needle through there to just kind of hold them in place, and that's going to help me line up the center of the flower. There is another circle that doesn't have those little pinking edge to it, but I am going to add a button to mine, so I am skipping that layer. And what I'm going to do is line these up with that circle of dots or holes, I should say, on the S. This is very helpful when you're going through all of these pieces of felt that we have these already pre-cut holes. I don't think I said earlier, but I do take my 6-ply floss and split it into 3, and so that's what I'm using here. I'm using a purple so that it matches the purple felt. I didn't want this one to be contrasting because I'm adding that button on top. I wanted to keep it a little more simple. And I'm just making sure I'm lining up all these holes. Once you get the first couple stitches going, you don't have to kind of fiddle with it quite as much. They're going to line up really nicely. And I'm doing the running stitch around, so you can see I'm skipping every other stitch as I go around. And once I get back to where I started, I will go back in the other direction and fill in those stitches that were missing. So once I get all the way back around, and I am just flipping it back and forth to make sure I get it right in the hole, and I accidentally went through one of the holes of my S, so I had to pull that out. I'm going to re-thread my needle here and get that last little stitch of the flower done. And then once I have this piece stitched in the center, I'm going to tie it off. I'm going to get my tail here that was kind of loose, and I'll tie this in a knot and secure that. And then I'm going to trim off those tails because I will use a new piece of floss for my button. Now my button is a purple, kind of lighter purple button. I am layering that over top of everything I've already stitched on there. And I switched to a different needle that has a sharper point because I need to pierce through all that felt to sew my button in. So I'm going to come up through that buttonhole and go back down. And I am using the other part of the floss that I split earlier, so this is only 3-ply of floss. And I'm going to go up and down in this button a couple times. And that's not because it needs to be that secure. It's not a functional button we're using over and over, but I just wanted to have a nice thick floss going across this button because it is a slightly different shade of purple, and so there's some contrast. You can see I was struggling a little bit to get it through that hole. I don't have a guide hole for this button, so I'm having to kind of poke it, and I just kept hitting the button rather than hitting the hole. So once it's through there a couple times, I'm going to tie it in a knot on the back and secure it and trim off those tails. So now we need to put our two S's together, and I am going to stuff this a little bit with some quilt batting. And the way I like to do this is I trace the die there and I'm cutting it out on the lines that I traced. Obviously, this is much bigger than my die cut piece because I'm tracing the outside of the die, but this is my favorite way to kind of make the letters look a little puffy. So then what I'm going to do is cut on the inside of where I already cut. Now you could draw you a guideline if you needed to, but basically what I'm trying to do is cut on the inside of where those stitching holes are. Just make a really skinny S that's just going to fit inside the solid part. And you can see there I'm just checking it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I am cutting a little bit off where it kind of went over the holes. But trying to stuff a skinny letter like this with polyfill just sounds like torture, honestly. Like, I don't really wanna do that. So this is just gonna give it a little bit of puff, and we're going to sandwich it in there. Just gives it a little bit extra puffiness, not a whole lot. I don't like my letters super fat. I want it to still look flat. So now to stitch around the outside, I'm using a contrasting color of floss. Again, I am using 3-ply. I've lined up my two S's with that batting in the middle. You can kind of see it there. And I started my first stitch between the two layers. So that tail that's kind of hanging out there is coming out from between my two layers of the S. And I'm just going to start stitching around with a running stitch. Now, because this letter is kind of floppy and flopping around, I'm going to use some clover clips to just hold it together in place. Kind of gives it a little weight so it doesn't flop around as much, but that's going to hold my two S's together while I work my way around. And I'm going to speed this way up so you can see my stitching really fast. Again, I'm doing a running stitch like I do all the time. So you can see it looks like every other stitch. And this is actually a fun look that I like to keep sometimes, but if you wanted to fill it in, you could go back in the other direction once you get to the end and fill that in so you have one solid stitch. So I've skipped all the way to the stitching. I'm back to where I started and you can see my running stitch around. Now for this project, I left it like this. I like that look of every other stitch, but like I said, you could do what you want. So on this last stitch, what I want to do is come up between the two layers. So now I have two tails that are coming out between the layers, and this is where I am going to tie them off together in a little knot. You pull that knot tight and it's going to go down in that little sandwich between the two layers of felt. Then I can take my tail and thread it through the back and just trim it off. And then for the first tail that I had here, I just need to re-thread my needle and do the same thing. So you're going to thread it between the layers and then poke it somewhere out the back and then pull it tight and trim it off. And now your tails are buried in your felt. Now you may have noticed that there is no hanger on this S. I am going to attach the hanger in a different way. This is Scout's original decoration for her tent. This is her fall decor, and I added the hanger after the fact using a piece of felt and a ribbon. So I cut a circle of felt in the same color, just using a circle die that I had. I'm taking my ribbon and I'm going to make my little loop. Put that on the back. I'm going to figure out where I need to trim it off so that the ends get hidden underneath the circle. And then I am bringing out the tacky glue, and I'm sorry for my head. I'm trying to hold this in place and grab things on my desk. So I'm going to add tacky glue between the layers of the ribbon and onto the felt. And then I will add my little circle, and it's a great finishing touch. And then I will just leave this to dry. But this is a great way to add a hanger after the fact if you forget, or it could just be part of the design. I kind of like this because it's on the back side versus right in the center to add any bulk to the S. So I just added a little more glue and I will set this aside to dry. So now that it is dry, I have a fun spring decoration for Scout's tent. I like to change these out seasonally. I have a heart, I have an egg, I have a wreath for her tent, and it is always fun to create new things to hang on her tent. So here is a picture of this decoration and Scout being such a good girl while I took her picture. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day and happy stitching. Bye.